again, I'm not quite I forget how the story goes, and I apologize if I'm getting it wrong, but like he got money through Ted Turner in some way, and he used those funds as well as his own to put on the first WrestleMania, and if that didn't succeed, then they were pretty much going to close.
Yeah.
Because what he had done was he started bankrupting all of the territories around him, too, by buying all of their top guys. So, he started that whole, domino effect of being, the number one promotion, where at the time it was WCW, but that only lasted up until, I think, December 1997.
Yeah. I also want to point out that technically WrestleMania wasn't the first wrestling pay-per-view because WCW had put on Starrcade, I believe, the previous year.
Yes.
The difference was that
I think it was the national scale that was the difference. Yeah. It wasn't the first wrestling pay-per-view.
Yeah, Starrcade was more of a regional thing.
Yeah.
Also, WrestleMania, while Starrcade was kind of like the biggest names in wrestling at the time, WrestleMania was more geared towards getting a wider audience of the general public. So there was a lot of celebrities, like Muhammad Ali. I'm pretty sure Cyndi Lauper was involved with the first. They were getting a lot of mainstream celebrities. So whereas Starrcade was kind of like a exhibition of like the best talent in wrestling at the time, WrestleMania was more of a let's see how many people we can get to watch pro wrestling by having all these big name stars on there.
Well, that was where it started to get into the whole sports entertainment idea, because Vince had he had a vision that of what, not of what wrestling could be per se, but of what mainstream wrestling could be, because what WCW was doing and what WWE were doing were always two very different things. Up until even when we get to the eventual sports entertainment and whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
The WCW was strictly a wrestling product. The NWA was strictly a wrestling product. WWE has always tried to embody the entertainment aspect. It's always been wrestling. I hate to say this, but wrestling has. I mean, it's more prominent now, but wrestling in WWE has always kind of taken a back seat to the entertainment portion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we can have an argument on it was that the best thing for wrestling or was it the worst thing for wrestling?
It's hard to tell.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because, essentially it saved wrestling because wrestling was really getting hit hard in the 80s. Public scrutiny was at an all-time high because there was, the fears over steroid abuse. You had the whole thing with that we talked about on the first episode with what was it, Dr. D, who slapped a reporter. People, the public was really starting to scrutinize wrestling, and at the same time, they were losing fans. There wasn't really nearly as many people watching wrestling. So you could really argue that in some ways WrestleMania and Vince saved wrestling, but at the same time, it kind of fundamentally changed wrestling because Vince basically monopolized wrestling, by buying up all the territories, and B, they turned wrestling into a main, and this is the whole hipster argument, when things get popular, they're not as good. When the more mainstream things get, the less good they are. So
that's not always true. That always depends on how it's on how the product is being handled. Whether or not the product changes, that depends. Because you could say, because the MCU, perfect example of this. It's as mainstream as it could get to the point where. I don't know, but I can't speak for everyone, but I'm starting to tire of it because I'm getting into I think that there's just a superhero overload thing, but the MCU, it's it's as mainstream as it could get, yet it's all pretty well done. I can't say that there's any bad movies necessarily, but there's there's not any.
Varying levels.
Yeah, I would say there's varying levels, but I wouldn't say that any of them any of the Marvel movies suck.
No, they're not terrible. But again, it's like not great filmmaking. Like, you're not watching it to like see like a great plot or great acting. You're watching it because there's big explosions and cool like mech suits and superheroes and all this other good action sequences.
Right, but I know what I want, and they're delivering it to me.
Right. So
like I have very specific expectations. This is why I'm like using this, because you could compare it directly to wrestling. Whereas with wrestling, I know what I want, and many times they do not give it to me anymore.
Yes.
So that is the problem.
And it's like so it's the same argument. Wrestling became that, like, where it's like big big guys and stuff like that, and like just like big personalities and crazy characters, and it's fun to watch. If you want to watch like good technical wrestling, well, you watch the indies then, or something like that, or or New Japan's, something that's not as mainstream. So you kind of you still have the choice there to get, if you really want to see like the big stars that are like the top of the wrestling industry, you could watch WWE, WrestleMania, that kind of thing. If you want to see like better, good technical wrestling, then
Ring of Honor.
Right.